And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Anthony Hamilton with us, former professor of communication at Capilano University in North Vancouver, Canada. He is recognized internationally as an authority on the art and science of mental time travel. His book, Mind, Time, and Power, describes the results of his 30 years of research into how our thoughts and feelings shape our lives. And this work began after an out-of-body experience at the little age of 10, where he saw himself at the age of 32 and spent 20 years searching for an answer to that question: how is it possible to receive information from the future? He eventually realized that all of us receive information from the future constantly, but most of us are simply unaware of it. Anthony's passion is to awaken everyone to their inborn ability to prove and improve their lives with simple mental tools and techniques. Anthony Hamilton, back on Coast to Coast. Anthony, welcome back.
George, how great to talk to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, and how about yourself?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Great. You've got a new book out called The ABC of Making Your Dreams Come True. Tell me about this.
Yeah, you won't believe this, man. This book was written in 1984.
By who? You?
By me. When I first started to get into the powers of the mind and I was doing workshops, I was exploring using my inner senses, and practicing things like astral traveling and visualization techniques and remote viewing and that sort of thing. And so I kind of felt this nudge that I should write a book. So I rented a typewriter, sat down at the typewriter, and what started to happen almost immediately was I heard a voice in my head. So I just started taking dictation, writing it down.
Sure.
And this went on for several months. 3 hours a day, I sat down at 9 o'clock in the morning and just started writing, and then at noon it just sort of shut off, And so I was traveling and doing workshops at the time. So I had these typewritten pages that I had written, and I called it the ABC of Making Your Dreams Come True. And I used to go to Kinko's, the local Kinko's print shop. I'm not even sure if Kinko's is still around.
There's a few. There's not many, but there's a couple.
I guess. And so I used to run off a few copies of this book. And I would sell them at my workshops, when I was doing my mind power training. And over the years, I moved a couple times, went through a divorce, was in a car accident and spent some time in the hospital, stopped doing the workshops for quite a while, and sort of lost track of this manuscript, right? But I knew it was around somewhere. And just about a year ago, I think around the time that I was on with you, which was last August.
And we were talking about your books called Mind, Time, and Power at that time, I think.
Yeah, Mind, Time, and Power, and the Mental Magic Life Planning Workbook.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I knew that I had this other manuscript floating around. I just didn't know where it was. And so I was cleaning up one of my one of the voluminous boxes I have in my storage room, and lo and behold, here's this manuscript, right? And it was on it was still typewritten, 8.5 by 11 paper, right? I couldn't do much with it, so I thought, well, I have to have it scanned and turned into a Word document, so that I can edit it. So that's what I did. And I started working on it 6 or 8 months ago, I guess, and finally got it finished. And I was amazed, to tell you the truth, because I hadn't looked at this thing. Now, I wrote this in 1984. That's almost 40 years ago.
I know it. My God, it's almost half a lifetime.
It's unbelievable, right? So as I was going through this thing, because when I scanned it, as the scanner makes a whole lot of mistakes, right? So I had to sort of go through the manuscript and clean it up. And I was actually amazed at how many of the ideas in that book were the ideas which I would have thought, if you asked me, I would have thought that I sort of came up with them a few years ago, like 10, 15 years ago, right? Because when I wrote Mind, Time, and Power, which was in 1999, I started first of all thinking, well, maybe I'll find that manuscript and I'll clean it up and I'll use that. But it just seemed like too much trouble, So I thought, well, I'll just write a new book. So I sat down and I just wrote Mind, Time, and Power, which of course is my best known book. And so as I was going through this new manuscript, the ABC of making your dreams come true, I was amazed at how strong and how present, if I can use that word, those ideas are. I think it's a fabulous book. And because it was more or less channeled, it has a different flavor to it in a lot of ways than my normal writing does.
What do you think of dreams at this point, Anthony?
Dreams. Well, I had a dream. I told you about that story.
Yep.
So, dream is a word that means different things to different people. I mean, we have dreams when we're asleep, right? Some of them, most of them you forget. I mean, you wake up in the morning and maybe there's a little snippet of the dream in your head, and as often as not, it disappears, right? But we also have dreams, like people say, well, people have a dream of getting a dream job or buying a dream house or, going on a dream vacation, right? So the idea of a dream, now I use the word dream to mean any thought that you have of something that you want. Doesn't matter what it is. You want to lose 10 pounds, that's a dream. You want to take a trip to Europe, that's a dream. You want to buy a new car, that's a dream.
Sure.
So to me, every thought of anything that you want, that's a dream. And so the idea behind making your dreams come true is that everything starts that way. And by working with those thoughts, and the key to having it happen is to decide to experience it. Once you make a decision, I want to get this new car, or I want to take this trip, or I want to, I'm really going to focus on losing that 10 pounds, whatever it might be. That decision kind of clicks your mind into a different gear. And so everything is a dream, in a sense. All your thoughts are dreams. But when you decide that I want to achieve this one, or I want to manifest this one, or I want to experience this one, then they change into something more specific.
In order to manifest, you first must dream, right?
Absolutely. If you don't have a dream, there's a song, right, that says, if you don't have a dream, how are you going to make your dream come true, right? So we all have dreams, but a lot of us, me included, got scolded when I was young for being a daydreamer, because when you're in school, of course, you're supposed to focus, pay attention to the teacher, and some of us got rapped on the knuckles if we were staring out the window and daydreaming. But in 1995 at Harvard University, using something called a functional MRI, scientists finally realized that what we call daydreaming is exactly the same thing as memory. So memory, as far as the actual appearance of it on a functional MRI screen, is identical to a daydream. So thinking of the past and thinking of the future are really the same thing. And, of course, this is what I discovered for myself in 1980 when I had that dream again from the age of 32. I had the same dream I had at 10 years old, and that was my big aha moment that said, hey, thinking and memory is not a recording, which I had always thought, right?
Sure.
A memory is a recording of something. It's recorded somewhere in the brain. And as a matter of fact, when the scientists started using the fMRI at Harvard University and at the U of T in Toronto, they were looking for the place in the brain where the memories are stored, because that's what they thought. They thought that the memories must be in the brain somewhere. So they were looking for these memories in the brain. And what they finally realized is they're not in the brain. At least they're not in the brain in any place that they can identify.
It's stored like in a wireless thing, isn't it?
Well, they're stored in the ether somewhere, They're stored in time. That's how I think of it now. That, somewhere in time. That's one of your lines, right? Somewhere in time. So this, to me, was my big breakthrough, the idea that a memory of the past or a dream of the future are, in fact, identical.
Truly remarkable how it works, too.
Oh, absolutely. I had so what I came to when I was putting together this theory of consciousness of mine, because as you mentioned in the introduction, I had the dream when I was 10, saw myself at 32, and obviously it impacted me because it's been the course of my life ever since then. So
did you know it was you?
Oh, I knew it was me. I mean, I had a sense that this is me at 32, right? It was like I was above myself, out of my body somewhere, looking down at myself, and I saw myself writing and teaching and traveling and teaching people about their inborn power to have better lives, and so that was what I thought I was going to be doing when I was 32, which, as it turned out to be true. But it certainly wasn't a direct route from age 10 to age 32 because I more or less failed out of high school. So when I was in my mid-teens, for whatever reason, I just lost my self-image, lost my sense of purpose, and I became what I called an angry young man, just protesting everything, all the stupidity with the government and the old people and everything else. And so blew my high school education, which as soon as I realized, I'm not going to be able to go to university because part of what I saw in the dream was that I was going to become a university professor. Well, that meant, okay, finish high school, go to university, get a degree, get a master's degree, PhD, and become a university teacher. Well, that didn't happen because I failed out of high school. And so for the next 10 years I became pretty depressed. I mean, I did a lot of drinking, a lot of, smoking. I gained weight. By the time I was 25 years old, I was over 50 pounds heavier, smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I was either drunk or stoned, it seemed like, all the time. But that dream still kind of haunted me. So what happened was I realized when I was about 28 or so, my girlfriend and I suddenly realized we're going to be parents. Well, that kind of snapped me into a whole different sense of responsibility, and I realized I need to clean my act up. I need to turn my life.
Yeah, but you were smart enough, Anthony, to think that, because some people don't.
That's true. I mean, in a sense, it is lucky, right? But at any rate, so I started to because I'd been reading about the mind ever since I was 10. I mean, I was reading books on psychology and philosophy and metaphysics and Einsteinian space-time physics and yoga philosophy and that kind of thing, trying to figure out what is this thing about thought and time? How does it work? So I had been reading all of these books. I mean, literally hundreds of books trying to answer the question. And so when I got to be around 28 and I realized I was going to become a dad, I figured, I better get my act together here. So I took a course in Silva mind control. And that course really opened my eyes to the fact that we have these 5 inner senses.
And that was huge back in the 60s and 70s, too.
It's still huge. It's still huge. It's an amazing course, So when I realized that I have these thoughts going on, because until then, I'd sort of forgotten about the dream, and I wasn't really aware that I was thinking. And when I started to realize that I can visualize something, I can train myself to see images in my mind, I can hear sounds and voices in my head, I can develop a sense of my feelings in my body, that was a huge eye-opener for me. So that was something which I would definitely put down as a major turning point in my life, when I learned about using my inner senses.
What do you think it was that propelled you 32 years into the future?
Well, I'll tell you what I think it was now. It took me a while to figure this out. But when I was around about 30 years old, I started teaching courses in creative visualization, following up on what I had learned from Silva Mind Control. And I worked for a company for a while called Success Motivation Institute, started by Paul J. Meyer, who I think you're probably familiar with.
Yes.
And taking courses and eventually teaching courses with that company, I realized the value of a goal. You have to have a goal. If you want to be successful, you have to have a goal. Because success, by definition, is the achievement of a goal. So I started doing these workshops on setting goals, planning your life, using the Paul Meyer goal-setting system, and using your inner senses to visualize the future that you want, and that sort of thing that I had learned from Silva Mind Control. And I remember it, I was 32 years old. I was teaching a course in Portland, Oregon. And what I had seen in that dream was that I was going to be traveling internationally teaching people, right? So I was doing a workshop in Portland, Oregon, and of course I was from Vancouver, BC. So I'm down in Portland. I have a class full of people there. I'm having them close their eyes and remember the past and use your inner senses. And I suddenly realized, oh my God, here's that dream coming true. So at that point, I started using my inner senses, we'll call it, creative visualization. Because until then, I had been using creative visualization to look in the future and set goals and achieve goals. And what I started to do was to use it in the past, because I had such negative feelings and emotions and ideas about my past. School was a bummer. The church was a bummer. My parents didn't understand me. I had nothing but anger and resentment, it seemed like, about my past. And I thought to myself, this is not right. There's something wrong here. I mean, every kid you see is happy-go-lucky, playing games, playing with their friends. How come I can't remember any positive experiences from my childhood? Well, I couldn't. And so I started to go back in my mind and try and remember some positive experiences. And eventually, and it took about 2 months, from Silva Mind Control, I'd been used to doing these visualization exercises for about 20 minutes every day. And I'd been doing this now for years.
Well, how do you know, Anthony, that you weren't doing prophetic dreaming?
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. But let me just answer your question here for 1 second. So what I eventually got to was I remembered having that dream at 10 years old. And I thought, that's it. That's the answer that I've been looking for since I was 10. How is it possible to get information from the future? Because I had thought that memory was a recording. It's not a recording. It's a connection. When I'm 32, remembering being 10, there's a connection between me at 32 and me at 10, right?
Absolutely.
So if it's true that it's a connection, it makes sense that 10-year-old would have some kind of intuition about being 32. And, of course, I had the dream when I was asleep. So even though the information was in my 10-year-old's mind, it was in his unconscious.
And you remembered it. Stay with us, Anthony. We're going to come back and chat more in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. It's George Norrie with Anthony Hamilton. His website is mindtimeandpower.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com for you. And we're talking about several of his books. The one that you wrote on Mind, Time, and Power, what's the power portion of that, Anthony?
Yeah, well, the power part of it is the power that we have is the power to change a thought. It's so subtle, but by changing one thought, it gives you a whole different sense. And I can explain that really simply. If I ask, I often do this in my workshops. I'll say to somebody, I'll say to the audience there, who likes dogs? And hands go up.
All the hands go up.
Who doesn't like dogs? Well, there's a few hands go up, right? So if I say to them, well, you don't like dogs, you say, right? Tell me what dog you're thinking of. What are you thinking of? And invariably, they're thinking of a dog that's dangerous, scary. Maybe they got bitten as a child,
Yeah.
So when they think of a dog, what they see is these big, snarling teeth, right? So I say, well, what about a dog that's 3 weeks old?
A little puppy.
That's so. The puppies are cute. I'm not afraid of a puppy, right? So that's a different thought. Rather than thinking of the snarling dog with the big teeth, think of the little thing that's 3 or 4 weeks old. So that's the power we have, is by simply changing one thought, you change your energy, you change your feelings, change your emotions, change your expectations, right? But the trick is, of course, to figure out what thought to think.
Right.
That takes, time, it takes practice, it takes journaling, it takes thinking, it takes meditating.
Some people are better at it than others.
Some people are better at it than others, and, to be honest, I think I probably had a knack for visualizing when I was young, even though I lost it when I was in my teens and 20s, but I regained it. But of course, people can, there's certain people can hear a melody in their head and they can play it on the piano or on the guitar. Other people can draw a picture. I can't do any of those things, but I can certainly visualize something, right? And of course, visualization is really one of the most powerful keys to creating your dreams.
I'm fascinated by the story of Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, who had a dream initially just to sell books online. And he was so excited about that. And I'm not sure he saw the vision then of opening it up as an online marketing. I think other people told him about that, and he jumped on that. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, that sounds perfectly normal from my experience. We all have a horizon because we're always someplace, right? So when we move from that place, we move 10, 15, 20 miles away, we have a different horizon now. So it's that way with any goal that we set, even without setting goals, just growing with experience. The amount that we can see, or the things that we can see from our present position, 6 months or a year or 2 years from now, we're going to have a different horizon line. So it makes perfect sense that Jeff Bezos had the idea of starting an online store selling books. Matter of fact, that's where I first published Mind, Time, and Power. And then once you had that set up, of course,
and that was genius all by itself.
Pardon?
That was genius all by itself.
Absolutely, and this was the reason that I wrote Mind, Time, and Power, because when I had the original manuscript back in the 80s, it wasn't easy to publish a book. If you didn't have a publisher, you were sort of out of luck, right? And so that's why I used to print these things up and publish them myself in small numbers at my workshops. But when Amazon came along, I guess it was the late 90s, 98, something like that, 99, I realized, hey, they would publish my book for me, right? So that's when I sat down and wrote Mind, Time, and Power. So I think it's perfectly normal. You have a vision of something, and then when you achieve it, then you can see more. You can see farther.
In terms of the dreams, how far out, like you saw yourself at 32 when you were 10, so you saw 22 years into the future.
Right.
How far out can people go?
Well, one of the things I saw in my dream, and when I say saw, I'm not sure it was actually visual. I mean, I certainly had a visual impression of myself teaching and writing at the age, and it just seemed there was just a sense that I was 32, right? But a part of that same vision was that I was going to be a university professor, and I was going to be married to an Asian woman. Well, that didn't happen when I was 32. And like I said, I sort of bombed out of high school. Well, when I got to be in my mid-30s, I realized that I could go back to university and kind of get back on track toward being a professor. So that's what I tried to do. I did a bachelor's degree, I did a part of a master's degree, and then I was in a car accident and had to drop out. And again, the dream kind of faded. But a few years later, I decided to get into teaching, and I had a degree in linguistics. I've always loved languages, and so I started teaching English. Well, that took me to China. And when I was in China, I met my wife.
You fell in love.
We got married in 2006. Well, I had that dream at 10 years old. That was around 1956 or 57, right? So that's 50 years later. 50 years later that I married a Chinese woman, right? And it was around that time that I became a university professor completely by a fluke. I had given up on that goal because I thought I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get a PhD, and so I had forgotten about it. But I went to China with Capilano College as a English language teacher, working in the university in Harbin in China, employed by Capilano College. And I remember one day when the head of the college came and held a special faculty meeting, and she said, "I got some good news. Capilano College just received its charter from the province of British Columbia. We're now Capilano University, and all of you faculty members are now officially university professors." And I nearly fell out of my chair. So this was something that I had sensed that was a part of this vision of mine 50 years before. I had completely forgotten about it. Now, how do you explain that?
And what does that? What drives the mind, whether it happens in a year or 50 years? What drives the mind to even conceive of that?
Well, the way I understand it now is that, here I am at my age, my advanced age, right? I can remember marrying my wife in your dream. Well, it's a memory now. But I can remember becoming a university professor. I can remember being 32 years old in Portland, teaching that class, and suddenly realizing, oh my God, here's that dream that I visualized, right? So the way that I see it now is that these events, if you want to call them that, they all exist in my mind right now. I can remember being 10, having that dream. I can remember being 32. I can remember, getting married in 2006. So they're all just stations on the same track, right?
What made the dream, though?
Well, I believe what it was the fact that I had spent 2 months visualizing every day for half an hour, trying to remember positive events from my childhood. And after 2 months, I got to the place where I could remember all kinds of stuff about that summer when I turned 10 years old. And eventually, as I say, after about 2 months of doing this visualization exercise, I remembered having that dream. So to my mind, it's just as possible to say that my memory exercise at the age of 32, when I was remembering being 10, was the trigger for me to have that dream. Because, as I said a minute ago, thinking is a connection. So if 32 is connected to 10, 10's got to be connected to 32. So to me, that's just as logical an explanation of how I had that dream at 10 years old as anything else. In physics, they call it retrocausation, right? What? Einstein said it's possible for the cause of a present situation to be in the future or in the past. As far as relativity goes, the past, the present, and the future, according to Einstein, they're all the same.
Where does extrasensory perception come in?
ESP is using your inner senses. When you remember having breakfast this morning, that's using your ESP. It's extrasensory. In other words, it's outside of your physical senses. We've been programmed and we've been hypnotized into thinking that the only senses that matter are the ones that we can see when we look at the physical world with our eyes and our ears open. But we have a whole universe of inner senses going on constantly inside our mind that we generally don't pay any attention to. But they're always there. Those inner senses are always going on. And if you think about it, as I've done now for around 65 years, I noticed all kinds of examples of people having a vision and then creating that vision. Sylvester Stallone is one.
That's right.
Everybody knows. Jeff Bezos, right? Any entrepreneur has a dream and a vision, and if they work at it and they persist and they use all the other success principles like planning and self-motivation and, that sort of thing, they can create their vision as a physical result in the world. All of us are the architects of our own experience. An architect has a vision for a building, and he creates a building. We have a vision for our life, and we can create the life that we envision.
I have a friend of mine who worked at Bloomingdale's in New York when he was a younger guy, and he worked with Frank Stallone, Sylvester's brother.
Right.
And Frank Stallone told my buddy, my brother is going to be a huge Hollywood star. He's written a script about a boxer. Now, my buddy laughed, right? He just said,
exactly.
Sure, Frank, okay, great, and ha, ha, ha. But all of a sudden, look what happens. Well, I'm in a restaurant in Los Angeles. I go back and forth between L.A. and St. Louis. And I'm in Los Angeles, and in walks Sylvester Stallone with a group of his buddies. And, you don't go up to these folks. But I said to myself, I got to tell him this story.
You got to go talk to him.
I got to tell him. So I get up, and all of a sudden his buddies kind of encircle him, like, who is this guy? And then I said, Sly, I got to tell you a story about your brother Frank, who worked at Bloomingdale's in New York. He stopped everybody, kind of pushed his friends aside. He said, how did you know that? Nobody knew that Frank worked at Bloomingdale's. How did you know that? And I said, well, let me tell you the story. So I told him the story about how Frank told his brother, my buddy, how his brother was going to be this huge Hollywood star. He's written a script about a boxer, and he's going to be a superstar. And he started tearing up. Right. It was amazing, but he had a vision, and he made it happen. As a matter of fact, Hollywood loved his script, but they didn't want him to play Rocky. They didn't want him as the actor. And
that's right.
And he insisted on that. He said, no go unless it's me. And they finally...
Did you hear the story about him selling his dog?
No, I never heard that one.
Well, he was so broke, when he had the script written. And he was living, and he couldn't afford to buy food for his dog. Oh. So he eventually decided, painfully, that he was going to have to sell his dog, Butkus, right? Butkus was his dog.
Sure.
So he figured he had to, the only thing he could do, because, he was willing
That was the name of the dog he used in the movie, too.
That's the same dog.
Okay.
So what happened was he decided, it's not fair to put Butkus through this, right? I'm willing to starve in order to achieve my dream. So he sold the dog. He went down to the local liquor store and stood there for a few hours. Somebody came up and he sold the dog for $75, right? And it was just after that
just so the dog could eat.
He said, that's right. He didn't want the dog to starve. So it was just after that he sold the script and got the movie deal, right? And he was paid $25,000 to star in the movie because, as you said, they didn't want him in the movie, right?
And they gave him a percent.
They gave him a percent, and they gave him $25,000.
Yep.
He went back to the liquor store to try and buy his dog back. And when the guy showed up with the dog, he tried to buy the dog back, and the guy didn't want to sell it.
He liked Butkus.
He said, "You paid me $75 for the dog. I'll give you $300 for the dog." The guy says, "No, the kids love the dog. I don't want to sell it. I'll give you $1,000." He says, "No way." He eventually bought the dog back. He paid the guy $8,000
from his 25. Wow!
Promised him a part in the movie.
I love it. What a great story.
That is a great story.
And there must be hundreds of them like that. The late Steve Jobs, when he came up with the Apple computer with Steve Wozniak, and Woz is still alive, though I heard he was in the hospital a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I don't know much about him. I know he's still around. I saw something the other day with him on the Internet. But the thing is, what we're talking about is the same story over and over and over again, right? The same thing happened to Michael Jordan. His parents took him to a basketball game when he was 10, and he said, "That's what I want to do. I want to be a professional basketball player," And actresses, you listen to the actresses and actors being interviewed on TV, and they say the story all the time. My parents took me to a movie when I was a kid. I saw Judy Garland singing and dancing in The Wizard of Oz, and I thought, that's what I want to do. When I grew up, I took dancing lessons and singing lessons and learned how to tap dance, and here I am in the movies now, right? So this is not unusual, George. It's the common thing to happen, but we don't recognize it because we're hypnotized, because the normal model of consciousness that we have, that we are taught all our life, is based on a model of Newtonian mechanics from the 17th century that was based on the way billiard balls hit each other on a billiard table. You know, one hits the other one, it moves off at an angle, hits another one. So this is the model that we used, or not we, but this is the model that was handed down to us that says this is the way our lives develop. We are a product of our past.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Stay with us. We're going to take a short break. We're at the top of the hour. Anthony Hamilton with us. We're going to open up the phone lines now. Jeremiah Harrison for Tom Danheiser, who's still nursing a little virus. He's okay. He's okay, folks. It's not COVID, but he'll be back with us next week. But we'll take your calls when we come back.